What actually happens when you type a URL and hit enter? It feels instant, but behind the scenes, your browser is doing a lot of work, communicating with servers, processing code, and finally turning everything into pixels on your screen. In this video, we'll walk through that entire journey, from a simple URL to a fully rendered web page. Let's start from the beginning. When you type a URL, the browser needs to find the server that hosts the website. It does this using DNS, which simply converts the domain name into an IP address. Once the IP is found, the browser establishes a connection with the server. If it's HTTPS, a secure connection is created. Then the browser sends an HTTP request asking for the page. The server responds with HTML. This HTML defines the structure of the page, but it also includes references to other resources like CSS, JavaScript, images, and fonts. So the browser doesn't just load one file, it starts fetching multiple resources. Now the real work begins. As the browser receives the HTML, it starts parsing it from top to bottom. For each HTML tag it reads, it creates a node and builds the DOM, the document object model. So the DOM is not created all at once, it's built step by step as the HTML is parsed. At the same time, the browser looks for CSS. When it finds a style sheet, it downloads it and builds the CSSOM, the CSS object model. This contains all the styling rules and how they apply to elements. So now we have the DOM for structure and the CSSOM for styling. Now let's talk about JavaScript, because this changes the flow. When the browser encounters a normal script tag, it pauses HTML parsing. It downloads the JavaScript file and executes it immediately. This is important because JavaScript can modify the DOM. So the browser must stop and run it before continuing. And here's a key detail. JavaScript runs exactly at the point it appears in the HTML. So it can only access elements that have already been parsed. If the script tries to access something that appears later in the HTML, it won't exist yet. But there's a different behavior when we use the defer attribute. When a script is marked as defer, the browser does not stop HTML parsing. Instead, it continues building the DOM while downloading the script in parallel. Then, once the HTML is fully parsed and the DOM is complete, the deferred script is executed. So in simple terms, normal scripts say, stop parsing, run me now. Deferred scripts say, finish building the page first, then run me. Once HTML is parsed, CSS is processed, and JavaScript execution is complete, the browser now has the DOM, representing the content, the CSSOM, representing the styles. Next, the browser combines these into the render tree. This includes only the elements that are actually visible on the screen, along with their computed styles. Now comes layout. The browser calculates the exact position and size of every element. It determines where each element should appear, how big it should be, and how it relates to other elements. Because elements can affect each other, even small changes can trigger recalculations. That's why layout can be an expensive operation. After layout, the browser moves to painting. This is where everything is drawn onto the screen. Text, colors, borders, and all visual details are converted into pixels. Then comes compositing. The browser splits the page into layers and combines them efficiently, often using the GPU. This makes rendering smoother and improves performance, especially for animations. Now, this process is not always smooth. CSS can block rendering because the browser needs styling before displaying content. JavaScript can block parsing because it may need to run before the DOM is fully built. That's why optimizing how resources load is so important. All of this work is handled by different parts of the browser. The UI layer is what you interact with. The browser engine manages the flow. The rendering engine builds the page. And the network layer handles communication with servers. Now, let's look at the full journey. You enter a URL. The browser finds the server. A request is sent. HTML is received. The DOM and CSSOM are built. JavaScript executes at the right time. The render tree is created. Layout calculates positions. Paint draws everything on the screen. And all of this happens in just milliseconds. But this is only part of how browsers work. In the next video, we'll explore browser APIs, storage systems, and what makes browsers so powerful beyond just rendering. That's where things get even more interesting. Subscribe for more simple explanations. you.